Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Dirty Basement Terrain. In this episode, we're going to be covering yet another in the series of pit trap tiles. But in this one is one that I think a lot of people have either run into as a player or love to spring as a DM or rebel rouser. The oh so fun spike pit trap tile. Now, I've been in many games where we've come across this, and I've run many games where I've actually used this pit trap. It's a good one to use in your games, but I'm going to show you how I make mine for my board. Now, in this episode, again, I am not covering the preparation of the graphics medium chipboard or the XPS foam that goes into this. That is covered in episode 1, which I'll put a link down here or up there. There will be a link in the description to episode 1. So if you want to review how I get the XPS and the graphics medium chipboard ready, you can go check it out. So let's get started and see how I do it.
Okay, first we're going to grab our graphics and our XPS, and we're going to grab a 3.5 inch plastic arrow pick that was purchased off Amazon. I got a pack of like 300 of them for a couple bucks. Gonna cut off, they have rounded ends, and I'm cutting off that rounded end. And I want to mark out places for the spear tips to go. I'm putting 9 because there's 9 square inches on this 3x3 tile. You could do more, you can do less, that's up to you. But this is, again, my tile, so I'm going to do it the way I want. And you can see the spots I marked. Now I want to punch the whole way through, so I create like a little cone on the underside of it, rather than trying to drill a hole. I want the cone, because that'll allow for more glue to work up into it. At least I think so. In my head I tell myself that. Now that I've got that all done, as you can see, nice little cones. Give a little extra space for glue to go into. Of course, I'm going to grab my wood glue here. I prefer using the wood glue for these tiles, being that I'm using the spear tips and I'm wanting a little bit of extra strength. Just to grab on and hold to the spear tips, because I don't want to use super glue, because super glue will eat the foam and I don't want that. So my best option is PVA, or wood PVA, wood glue PVA. Now just basically brush on a nice even coat on the underside where the cones are, and now that we've got it all on, just simply press it on and line it up with the graphics, and this step is done. Okay, now we gotta prepare these plastic spear tips, or arrow picks. I'm gonna refer to them as spear tips. I'm gonna cut 3 of them up at a time because that's just easiest. As you can see, I got 3 together, and my side clippers can actually cut 3 at a time, so that's why I'm doing 3 at a time. No special reason. You can do 1, 2, 3, whatever you want to, but like I said, I'm cutting them to about a 1/2 inch length. You can do longer if you want to, but being that the thickness of my standard dungeon tiles are a 1/2 inch thick, I'm going to stick with that. Now that I've got all the spear tips cut, I'm grabbing some homemade texture paste that I use. It's a mixture of spackle, wall filler, and PVA, some sand, and paint for color. I'm just taking small little dollops of the paste and then kind of mushing it down into the holes that I made with the spears. That way, once I put the spears in, they'll actually have something to grab onto once it dries. It's a pretty simple process, not hard. Now once you're done doing that for your tile, seal up your paste. That way it'll last a lot longer. Take each little spear tip and slowly work it into the holes that you made. That way you'll actually drag in some of the texture paste down with it, and it'll glue. It'll, once it dries, it'll harden around the spear tip itself and hold it a lot better. If you do it like this, you're better off. And as you can see, I got them all in and they're standing up straight, so it's all good. Next thing I want to do here is get an old beater brush and get it wet, and then slowly brush out the edges of the texture paste so it's a little smoother. It blends in more with the tile itself. Is this something you have to do? No. I just prefer to do it. For me, it gets a better look. And as you can see, for me, this is the look I'm going for. And of course, being that you're working with XPS, we have to do everybody's favorite step, Mod Podge and black paint. As always, this is just a mixture of black paint and Mod Podge. Give the XPS a little extra strength. And it also gets, if you mix the black paint in, you get your black base coat right off the bat. And here's the thing, you don't always have to use black paint. You can use different colors if you want your base coat to be a different shade, or if you want, mix in white paint if you want your eventual paint job to be brighter. If you use black, you're going to get a darker overall paint job. Use white, it's going to be brighter, but we're going with black. Okay, now that we got the Mod Podge down, these plastic spear tips, Mod Podge isn't going to work very well on plastic. You could, I guess, but it's going to scrape off. So I'm getting out the airbrush, and I'm going to be using some Vallejo Surface Primer. It's just my go-to for plastic, and actually this is what I use on my minis too. Works pretty well, does the job. And the best thing is, if you get some on the tile itself, going through an airbrush like this is not going to melt the foam. You could paint the bare foam if you want with this, but you can use a rattle can at this point if you already Mod Podged, but I just didn't feel like going outside and using a rattle can. I always primer with an airbrush just because it's simpler for me. And of course, with this step, we're doing our base coat color. And as my usual, I'm using a dark blue gray from Apple Barrel. And again, if you don't want to use that color for your base coat, that's perfectly fine. Use whatever color you want. But again, these are my tiles, so I'm using my colors. But it's I'm going for 100% coverage with this. I mean, I'm trying to avoid the spear tips with this, but if you get some of this crap paint on, it's not going to be the end of the world. Of course, this is something else I like to typically do with my tiles and stuff like this, add little streaks of color. And as usual, I'm using DecoArt's True Ochre, Apple Barrel Kelly Green, and DecoArt Rookwood Red. As I've said it before and I'll say it again, this is a step you can completely skip. It's not necessary. This is just what I like to do to get a few streaks of color into the gray. It won't show it very well at the end, but it will be there very slightly and you will see it in real life. Now that we got that all done, we're going to do our mid-tone color. I'm using, as usual, Apple Barrel Pewter Gray. I'm going for roughly 80 to 85% coverage. And again, I'm trying to avoid, I'm not being too careful with this, but I am trying to avoid hitting the spear tips because they're plastic and I'm going to paint them a different color anyway. Okay, in this course, midtone's done, and we're going to be using Apple Barrel Granite Gray, and I'm using a smaller makeup brush that I got up from the Dollar Tree. I'm using the smaller makeup brush for the dry brushing because I'm trying to work around the spear tips, and the big one will just run right over them and add paint that I'm going to wind up covering up anyway, so. And with the spear tips, I don't want to be banging on them too much. And I'm trying to be nice to them. But again, do a highlight coat or a dry brush with this Granite Gray. Again, you can use whatever color you want. This is just my choice. If you don't want to do these next two steps, you don't have to. This is just how I like to do it. The highlight dry brush was done. Now I'm going to put on a dark brown wash. It's a homemade wash of mine. I like brown because, like I've said before, it just gives a dirty, nasty look. And this is a dungeon. They're not pretty. They're not supposed to be. Not in the fantasy world. They're supposed to be dirty, dank, and nasty. So that's the look I'm going for. Okay, now that the wash is all dry, you can see it looks pretty nasty. So I want to bring up some of those light colored highlights again with the Granite Gray. And I'm using my small makeup brush, and I'm going to give it a light dry brush, bring all the edges and whatnot up, but still leave that dirty, nasty, dank look to a little bit to it from the brown wash that I gave. Again, trying not to purposely run directly over the spear tips, because the more you hit it, the weaker it might get. So, it's strong enough that it's going to hold for some contact, but you don't want to purposely beat on it. Okay, now I'm going to be adding some moss because this is a deep pit with spears in it. But again, it's a deep pit in a dungeon, so there's more than likely going to be some moss growing. And the moss will add some color for some visual appeal to this. You don't have to do this, but again, like I said, the green will give that plain gray slab a little bit of visual appeal. You don't have to put a lot, maybe a little in the corners here and there, but it does help make it look a little bit better. Okay, now that the moss is all dry, let it sit overnight, I think. Want to start painting the spear shafts, not the spear tips, but the shafts themselves. I'm using a custom made dark brownish green color. It was the leftovers from a previous project, and I figured, hey, this will look good on spear tips in a deep pit, or spear shafts in a deep pit. So you can use any color you want, or if you want to, you can just paint the entire shaft and tip a metallic color. But I'm gonna go for wood for the shaft itself. Of course, now that base color is done, I'm going to do a highlight on the shafts. And this is basically leftover from the same project I had the darker color from. This is like a mid-tone to a light brownish green color. I said just want to catch the edges, give a little contrast to it. I'm not overly concerned with how the shafts look because they're not going to... Honestly, these tiles may not come out much, so I just want to get a good tabletop ready color look to it. And for the spear tips, I'm using gunmetal gray from Folk Art. You could use any color you want. This is just what I'm using. I just want to get all the tips painted silver, and just so, well, they look like spear tips, because I'm going for spear tips and not pikes. Painting a whole bunch of spear tips, honestly, it can be annoying, but this is a step that needs to be done, because unless you use something like toothpicks and you just want to go for wooden pikes, then you would just paint a couple wood shafts. But I like the spear tip look better than just plain old wood pikes. So every single tip is going to get the gunmetal. Okay, now that the tips are dry, I'm going to add some blood effects. Some Green Stuff World's Quagled blood effects. I've used that in previous videos. I just like this. I'm going to use a stiff bristle brush, stipple it on, because I want it to look like these pits have gotten victims already before. And for these, I just want to put it around the bases of a couple of the spears, because that seems, well, appropriate. Probably do roughly around, paint around 3 spear tips each. That seems to work. Now, of course, people slapping onto a spear tip is going to create a little bit of splatter, so I want to try and get some blood splatter as well as the blood pools at the base of the spears. It's just a little bit of extra touch, but it makes a little touch like that can make the difference. Okay, now I want to use some Citadel's Technical Martian Iron Earth. I want to put little spots of that onto the spear tips themselves to give it a bit of a rust effect. If you have a different way of adding rust, use your go-to method if you have a go-to method for rust. This is just mine. I bought this paint a while ago, and that's about the only thing I've ever used it for, is doing spots of rust. It seems to work. So just get a little tiny tap on each of the spear tips, because it gets damp in dungeons, and who knows how long it's been there. So,
hey everybody, if you made this far, it means you made it. Watch the whole thing, and I appreciate that. If you like the video, click the thumbs up. If you don't like it, click the thumbs down. If you want to see more videos of how I do my crafts, hit the subscribe button. If you don't want to see any more, don't. I mean, last time I checked, it was your choice to make, not mine. But I want you to always remember, though, if you liked it, hit the like. But always remember, when you're making terrain or your crafts, the only person you got to worry about is you, because it's your terrain.